Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Dolce Vita, and I am the owner of dapperQ. Thank you for joining us in our second in a series of virtual panels. Today's panel is Queer Media in the Time of COVID-19, and it's going to be moderated by Alex Berg. A little bit about Alex. Alex is a host and journalist. She recently hosted AM to DM, a BuzzFeed news show that aired on Twitter, where she interviewed newsmakers and celebrities from Stacey Abrams to Joshua Jackson. She's covered national news and stories about the lives of LGBTQ people and women for the past decade for an array of outlets. In her free time, Alex skates with Gotham Girls Roller Derby and lives with her wife and 3 cats. But before I turn it over to Alex, I wanted to say that even though dapperQ is a fashion media platform, we felt this conversation was necessary and needed, as many of people in our community are seeking different types of support from queer journalists and queer media companies at this time, ranging from factual LGBTQ health data as it pertains to COVID-19 to virtual events to online mental health groups. So we encourage you to send your remarks and questions in the chat box. If you do not feel comfortable sending them to everyone, there is an option in the chat box to just select my name and send them to me, and I will field them to Alex. And we will discuss your questions towards the end of the panel. So for now, I'd like to take it away for Alex. Thank you.
Anita, thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks y'all for joining us on this panel today. This is obviously such a timely topic just because I've heard of more layoffs that impacted LGBTQ media today. So I know this is a tough day for our colleagues and across the industry. I'm also just really excited to have this conversation because it's important and because I feel like connecting with other folks who are doing really good work right now just feels really, really good. As Anita mentioned, I'm here in Brooklyn at home. If you hear my cats in the background, apologies in advance. So on that note, we're going to talk for about 50-ish minutes, and then we'll open it up for that Q&A. So please join me in welcoming these amazing panelists. We'll start off with Eboné. Eboné F. Bell is the founder and editor-in-chief of Tagg Magazine and Tagg Communication, LLC. After seeing a lack of queer women represented in local publications, she decided to start a magazine and website to tell stories, provide resources, and create events. Eboné was recently featured in Forbes magazine as an inspiring Black entrepreneur changing our world. This year, Tagg Magazine will celebrate 8 years of telling thousands of stories, creating safe spaces for queer women, and providing important resources for the LGBTQ community. Over the past 3 years, Tagg Magazine has been named top 25 LGBTQ-owned companies by the Washington Business Journal. Please join me in welcoming Merryn, who is the editor-in-chief of Curve Magazine. She's also a digital news producer covering mainstream international news and a contributing writer for Edge Media Network's investigative department. She's a frequent global public speaker on LGBTQIA rights with a particular emphasis on women and diversity and inclusion. When she's not working as a journalist, she is pushing boundaries as a playwright and is a current board member of America's oldest LGBT theater writers group, Village Playwrights. And finally, please welcome Brooke Sopelsa, who is the editorial director of NBC Out, the LGBTQ digital destination launched by NBC News in June 2016. Under Brooke's leadership, NBCOut.com seeks to both enlighten and entertain by showcasing enterprise reporting, original videos, and other unique content about and of interest to the LGBTQ community. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So just to get us started, Eboné, let's actually start this question off with you. Can you each start off just by talking a little bit about the work you're doing daily, and how has it changed since this pandemic hit?
That is a great question. So we have our print publication, our website, a couple podcast shows, and we really pride ourselves on staying connected to the LGBTQ women's community. Now, COVID or this pandemic just threw us for an absolute loop. So it's changed. We still have that same commitment, but we've had to unfortunately scale things back. So for example, we have a print publication. I think we're one of 2 left of queer media, queer women's media print publications. And so this is the first time we're going to be skipping an issue and not running it. But it's not going to deter us. We're coming up with other unique ways to connect. We also, we obviously have the website and other ways, but it definitely is a little bit of a scary time. But there are various ways that we're staying in communication and connecting and having fun and getting the resources out there.
Merryn, you waved your hand in the middle of that when Eboné mentioned the print publications that remain. Talk about the work that you've been doing. How has it also changed, since we've been inundated with news about COVID-19?
Right, Eboné, my sister, my fellow sister in publishing, yes, it's been really hard, right? I think the coming into Pride season is very difficult for us because for the first time in 30 years, Curve is not going to have a Pride issue. We were relaunching the magazine and the website just as this hit. We got the website done, but we had to, really hunker down and change. We had to really do a quick pivot. What we decided to do, my publisher Silke Bada and I, was to, instead of putting resources in a magazine that nobody would buy, because let's face it, I've been through this all before, the global financial crisis. I launched a magazine with Silke called Bound the night before the Great Recession was called. So we know what this looks like, so we're not publishing. What we decided to do instead was put all of that content, all of that support into artists and personalities and readers into a virtual festival, which would cost us nothing to do. It just required that we needed to be agile. So that's what we've been doing. We were the first LGBT organization in the world to do it. We launched in mid-March and we're going until the end of May. So it's Curve's virtual festival. And that's really what we've done to address, it's the most useful thing we could have done for readers at this time.
Brooke, how has your editing work changed? Can you talk a little bit about what you've been doing for NBC Out? Has the way that you're approaching stories changed at all? How are you finding a balance between covering the coronavirus and then also covering LGBTQ issues?
Well, the biggest thing that's changed is we're all working from our homes instead of the office. But for the most part, my day-to-day has stayed the same. Assigning, editing, publishing LGBTQ stories for NBC Out, which is the LGBTQ section of NBCnews.com. Coronavirus stories, I was just looking through my editorial calendar for April and kind of doing like a crude estimate of what our percentage coronavirus related stories have been of our April coverage. And it's been about, I would say maybe 35% of our coverage has been related to the coronavirus in some way. And the pandemic has really, been infused to all areas of life. But that's tapered off a little bit in the second half of the month. One big thing that's changed is our annual Pride list, which we publish every June, will, instead of being more broadly focused on LGBTQ people making a difference, will be focused specifically on queer people on the front lines of the epidemic. So we're looking to celebrate and honor LGBTQ doctors, nurses, grocery workers. So that is, one big initiative that we have that will be dramatically changed. We had initially planned on a 2020 political theme, but now we've pivoted, and I think, rightly so, to honor those people that are really putting their lives at risk to help others. But I think going forward, as we sort of continue dealing with this global crisis, I think we'll continue to cover all the LGBTQ angles we can of the crisis, but also try to really balance that with other content. There's so much else happening in our community, and I don't want to let, things slip through the cracks that we should not be letting slip through the cracks because we're dealing with this.
Yeah, I love that you talked a little bit about how you're shifting your Pride coverage. I mean, it sounds, right now, one thing I've noticed is it's a really difficult time to try to break through the news cycle because there is just so much coverage and emphasis on the pandemic, and trying to find new and unique approaches to it can be challenging. And just to break through the noise and figure out exactly what people want to be reading right now can be difficult. I'm curious about the kind of what impactful stories you each have seen. What kind of reporting, has left you feeling, have you felt has been compelling on each of your own sites and your own outlets?
I'm happy to go first. So I think two things. In terms of our coronavirus coverage, one thing that we had been covering was the ignited calls to have the FDA revise its what many people would consider a ban on gay and bisexual men giving blood. The pandemic caused a drastic shortage in blood donations because all of those blood drives were canceled. And there were a number of gay and bisexual men who wanted to donate blood and who also had who had gotten COVID-19, come through the other side, wanted to donate their plasma to help, you know, hopefully find a cure or a vaccine, and were unable to do so. So we had been covering that. I think we had covered before the FDA came out and said it would revise the deferral for gay men from 12 months to 3 months. I think we had covered four or five stories about the increasing calls for them to do so. So I feel like we really did our part to amplify the issue. The other issue that we had covered, which I'm still getting hate mail from, and I know my colleagues was the Central Park Coronavirus Field Hospital that is being run by Samaritan's Purse, which is a human rights relief group, but it's run by Franklin Graham, who is a well-known, unabashed homophobe, and we put a spotlight on that issue, and I think helped draw more attention to that. And still weeks later, I'm now getting hate mail from people who think it's inappropriate that we would shine light on that issue. But those are two of the things that I'm sort of proud of our coverage over the past couple of weeks.
I'll jump in if you like. I think I've been doing more investigative reporting, more COVID stories for Edge Media Network. Looking at, I think I did one of the first stories on the vulnerable HIV positive group and whether or not they would be affected differently. And that was like flying blind, because at that point there was really not much data. Nobody really knew what the virus was, but you rush in good faith to do it. With Curve, I've been taking a different approach. I think that lesbians and queer women are a very isolated group. So I felt that reaching out with the festival was a way of connecting us and hoping that we could give them sort of like hashtag community rather than more, hashtag COVID. So that's really the strategy that I took there with Curve.
Eboné, how about you? Are there any stories that you're really proud of right now that you've seen?
The best one that we have for sure is how the pandemic, how the virus is directly affecting the LGBTQ community. A lot of times we just don't have those numbers and facts and figures. And I know there was an organization that was calling for those numbers, for those stats to happen. I don't know. I don't think it's happened quite yet. But things that people don't really even think about, like mental health, for example, we tend to have higher rates of mental health issues and suicide thoughts than our heterosexual counterparts and things like that. So we really wanted to make sure that we had a great resource so people can understand exactly how this is affecting people in our community and the resources that we have. We actually have an article coming out at the end of the week, which I'm very excited about. There's an organization called Defend Yourself. And they're doing this great active bystander skill for stopping anti-Asian hate. And it's run by a queer woman, and she does it every week because unfortunately we're seeing a lot of hate crimes with our Asian brothers and sisters and folks. So I'm excited about that because it's a free service, it's a free resource that we can all use. So we just plan on continuing to provide resources as far as the pandemic.
Hmm. Something that I think that we're all kind of starting to get at is, it was interesting at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this mainstream media narrative that this would be the great equalizer of all people. Of course, as we know, that or rather that the pandemic would hit everybody in an equal way. Of course, we know that actually what has happened is that health disparities and different kinds of disparities and discrimination that existed before the pandemic have now just been amplified, that we see all of the cracks in the ways that the system, does not serve marginalized folks. They're even bigger and greater. How do you all think the mainstream media is doing with covering LGBTQ stories, and especially health disparities? For instance, I feel like I am finally just starting to see more reporting about how the pandemic disproportionately impacts communities of color, for example. So how do y'all feel like the rest of the media is doing in terms of covering these stories?
I'm a bit biased being part of NBC News, but NBC News has been covering the disproportionate impact on communities of color for weeks now across NBC News. So you'll see it on MSNBC, NBCnews.com, and my sister websites, NBC BLK, NBC Latino, and NBC Asian America have been doing great coverage on that as well. Much of our coverage for NBC Out is intersectional. But there has been, in terms of mainstream and parts of NBC News that are outside of NBC Out, I think NBC's been doing a great job. That said, I'm biased. And most of my news consumption, though I think New York Times, which is probably the other outlet that I'm looking at the most, has been doing a great job. But NBC, I think, had been really early on the issue and has been hammering at it really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think the New York Post is really the exemplary publication here, but other mastheads like The Guardian is doing a good job internationally. CNN is a regular go-to for me. Even publications like the New York Post, which is owned by News Corp, as you know, because it's the New York Post and it serves the city, there's good stories within there to look at. And New York's being hit disproportionately hard simply because it is a city driven by immigrants. It is a city that relies on social intimacy as part of its ecosystem. And I think it's why the death toll here is so high. So any media that covers New York fairly is by extension going to cover people of color, people in the theatre arts, many of whom are gay. But I will be honest, I don't think there is enough drilling down into our community, which is why our media has to cover it. The mainstream is never going to cover it like we do.
Eboné, how about you?
What I was going to say, for sure. This is why queer media is so important, because a lot of times they're not going to tell our stories. And I was going to joke and say I think NBC might be the only one in the mainstream that's actually doing that. So kudos to what you all are doing, Brooke.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to get into some more of the specifics about all of these things. And, one thing that I've seen, Merryn, is I've seen some people draw parallels between this pandemic and also the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 1980s. And just in preparation for this panel, when we all had a call together, something you mentioned is that you kind of tried to use the outlet to hold space for people and listen to, what your readers need to hear. What do you make of those parallels? And then also just what are you hearing from your audience about what they need right now?
Mm-hmm. Those parallels, I think I'm the only one here old enough possibly to actually remember when gay cancer, AIDS broke. And what we're going through right now, it has some parallels, and it's of course not similar at all, but there are parallels. Some of them are very emotional and psychological for me, this feeling of anxiety and fear and not knowing about exactly how this contagion works, who's most vulnerable. But also for me, the most disturbing thing is to see the same unlearned lessons, to see again that we have federal governments that are so ill-prepared, that have no regard for their constituents, that our medical system is woeful, that in the end we are all fearful of each other and we're all strangers when we should be helping each other. And it's the same thing again. There's a great article in the New Yorker written by Masha Gessen, and she pretty much draws all of these issues together. It's a quick and easy read, and she takes a survey on what the parallels are between the pandemics and what lessons we've learned and what lessons we have not learned. But I really do feel that the media outlet that I run, Curve, my main job, even above reporting on this, is to make sure that this pandemic does not destroy us as an outlet, and that I can keep that space open, because I see a publication not as information all the time. It's a space we hold open in the culture, and it's a place to meet just as much as it is something to read.
I love that idea of an outlet as both an extension of the community and creating that space. And especially at a time like this where we are connecting so digitally with each other, I really do feel like outlets, I mean, dapperQ facilitating a conversation like this, outlets are literally helping create these platforms for us to connect with each other. Eboné, what have you heard from Tagg's audience and readers in response to the stories you're doing and just about what they need right now?
So I think in dapperQ, actually, they just did a poll, polling their readers, and 85% of them said they want, more entertainment and arts and fun. So we are trying to basically balance that. And we've noticed that a lot of people are reacting to those fun and entertaining things that create a sense of normalcy. Because that's what we're all looking for right now, is a sense of normalcy. So everything from, telling people about a lesbian digital game that's like Hangout. People didn't even know about it. And so it's just a way to connect. We all miss that connection, and it's just a way to connect with not only your friends, but people across the country. So that's really exciting. We also, people loved our top 10 things to like listen to, do, watch during the quarantine. People really appreciated that. And what was really cool was to get feedback from people saying, oh, I didn't even hear about these. I didn't even know that these things existed. I'm gonna definitely watch them. And again, it's about, for us, it's changed because now we're about news, resources, fun, but also keeping that connection as well. And I think our readers definitely appreciate that. They appreciate the resources we give, but we can have a little fun in the meantime as well.
Yeah, I feel like there is a fair amount of balance required. And also I wanted to add that I don't know how I haven't added quarantine to my permanent vocabulary to carry me through this moment, but definitely after this conversation, it's in there. Brooke, earlier you had mentioned that you were getting actually some hate mail from your coverage of the field hospital in Central Park. What kind of response have you been getting? Because you're not just navigating a ostensibly LGBTQ audience that is reading coverage of the community, but you're also getting, the rest of NBC's demographic.
Yeah, I mean, being part of a bigger media company can be a double-edged sword because on one hand, you don't want to just preach to the choir. You want people, from all walks of life to know about LGBTQ issues. And in that respect, it's great. But you also get, people are seeing this on, they may follow NBC News on Facebook, or they see our story on Apple News, or, any of the various places that our stories can end up being distributed. And they're not necessarily accepting people who have proactively chosen to follow a queer outlet. So we get a significant amount of hate mail, but it keeps me honest as to, we don't just live in a rainbow colored queer bubble, which sometimes living in Manhattan can feel like that. There are a lot of people who still harbor a lot of hatred toward LGBTQ people. They are out there and they are very vocal. And they'll even share this type of, they'll share comments by email, with email addresses that look like their real name, or on social media, where presumably all of their Facebook friends can also see these comments. So I get a significant amount of emails and Facebook messages that are, homophobic or transphobic in nature. But it's just sort of par for the course. And if anything, it's more of a motivating factor. And I realize how important the work is of bringing queer stories to light, because I think media is a very powerful tool for educating people and changing hearts and minds. So that's my silver lining to that kind of those kind of messages.
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's been an interesting time to watch how coverage has shifted over the course of the pandemic. I think initially I saw just a lot of focus on breaking news about the pandemic, and now I've started to see some more stories about various like anti-trans legislation that is being pushed through states, you know, in particular red states that are using this as an opportunistic moment to try to undermine various kinds of autonomy for LGBTQ people, for women, and the like. You know, how are y'all like trying to cover those stories? You know, how much are like those kinds of stories still on your radar? I know we've talked broadly about finding the balance between coronavirus stories and now, like in terms of drilling down on these LGBTQ stories, I mean, how are you thinking about making some of those editorial decisions? Have you started to think ahead of, I don't know, like once we are on the other side of this pandemic, what the kind of coverage will look like? I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I mean, I do. It's quite hard for women because I feel that, you know, as Eboné mentioned before, there's some serious mental health issues right now. People are suffering from such anxiety and such isolation that it's almost as if they've had to drop their causes and the parts of themselves that really look out for their rights, because right now they've got issues like, I've lost my job, I can't pay my rent, I can't connect with my partner, I don't know if my kids are okay. So I've got to be delicate about that because people have gone into survival mode. And when they're in survival mode, I wonder if they want to hear about other stuff. Like there's this piece of legislation that's being pushed through right now while you're asleep. But the truth is that, you know, we will come out of this and we'll possibly come into a more dangerous political world in which we've been asked to drop our quest for equal rights. And that's what I'm worried about, that, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I think once the shock subsides and people have the correct information, we've had so much misinformation, like you don't need to wear a mask. Oh, kids can't get this. Oh, it's only a type of flu. Don't panic. All of which was wrong. All of it. All of the information about this thing has been wrong. So for me, as a journalist, I think it's really important to get the facts straight and make sure people feel that they know what their next move is going to be. And then when we're out of it, we'll fight harder because we will have survived.
Yeah, I think that it takes a certain amount of intentionality to make sure that we're still telling those stories, because we have a slick administration that will, you know, say, hey, look over here, look what we're doing, impeachment or whatever. Meanwhile, they're taking away trans rights. People don't have to serve you, or if you're LGBTQ, all these things that are happening. So it really does take a certain form of intentionality to say, okay, even though we're panicked, we're in this mode, we're also trying to balance fun and being freaked out and all that, we also still have to tell the stories that are happening around us. And it's hard to do sometimes with all the, as they say, squirrels popping up. So, and it's something that I want us to do better at, is making sure that we're super intentional about that. That was a really good question.
Do you have any,
I think
thoughts?
Even before the pandemic, and certainly now with, you know, all of the pandemic related issues that queer people are handling, I always say that my hardest job every day is to decide what we can't cover, because realistically we are, you know, we're a 2-person full-time team, and then we have, you know, other employees that are shared with other teams, and we have a group of amazing freelancers, but we are essentially a full-time staff of 2 people, and there's only so much we can cover. And, you know, fortunately, I'm able to lean on colleagues from other teams, like our NBC News's breaking news team has been great in covering LGBTQ stories if we're, you know, inundated with other news and something pops up. But there are so many queer stories to cover, and we're just, you know, so many people. I look at my job as doing the most that I can with the resources that I have. And sometimes that means not covering things that really deserve to be covered, but, you know, you can only do so much. And now with the pandemic, that's certainly increased the number of stories that should be told. But on any given day, you know, we can only cover at most half a dozen, you know, in my team specifically. So that's been a struggle.
Eboné and Merryn, is this something that you have also found yourselves up against, that there is simply more than you can possibly cover, or stories that you wish you were able to do? What are some of those stories that you would have been interested in covering that you just haven't had the bandwidth to do?
Look, I'd like to do a breakout series on real life heroes. I mean, we all bang our pots and pans at 7 p.m. and talk about health workers, but do you know how many gay people and queer people and trans people and lesbians are in the healthcare work profession? The number of gay male nurses I know who are friends of mine now, who, if those patients, some of them knew they were gay, probably wouldn't want to have any treatment administered to them. Same with paramedics and EMS workers. I think that's a great story that I would love to get to, and I hope I do. Something else I have been doing, though, is I've been supporting queer artists that have been put out of work, musicians, stand-up comics, chefs, personal trainers, and trying to give them the Curve Virtual Festival platform as a way to give them a little bit of money, a little bit of exposure, and increase their followings. Because while they might not be suffering from the virus, they're suffering from the economic downturn. So that's another way we've been able to help through our content platform.
Eboné, how about you?
You know, there's a few things we wanted to do down the pipeline that actually kind of halted things, and we wanted to do this video series where we were talking to allies about the LGBTQ people in their lives. And, you know, I always say our job is to tell every queer woman's story. So I'm going to be around for a while, right? And so that was something we were really looking forward to, because a lot of times, you know, you don't really get that perspective of you know, someone saying this LGBTQ person made a difference in my life because of this, this, and this. And we wanted to kind of do that type of angle. Obviously that's not happening right now because, you know, things have been halted. But I'm hoping that, you know, once things get back to normal, so to speak, or new normal, that we can start pushing out these stories to make sure that we are feeling this normalcy.
At the same time, while you are essentially supporting the community while spotlighting different kinds of stories, and like Merryn, through the festival that you're doing, how do you feel like the community could be also supporting your outlets? One of the things that we mentioned was, you know, obviously the way Pride works is going to be really different this year. I know that I think of like the very many advertising campaigns that happened around Pride, and I would imagine certainly bars, but there are also places that are reliant on thinking about getting the support of those kinds of campaigns. Are there ways that you feel like LGBTQ people could be supporting LGBTQ media? What would some of those be?
I mean, I do. I think we're spending more time on our phones than ever, and we're not going to pause our content. We're just going to change it a little bit and hope that you want to look at it. So, I mean, I'd love readers to follow us more on social media and to interact with us more and reach out more. I mean, I don't know what Facebook's done to its algorithm, but it seems that there's really not as much engagement as there used to be. And I think it's just they want money. They want us to advertise. They want us to boost posts. And I think that's really unfair. One of the gripes I have in this whole situation is, where the hell is Silicon Valley in all of this? You know, what are they doing to help? Where are these self-testing apps? Where are all the apps? You know, we don't need self-driving cars right now. We need help in terms of our actual human services. So we're all on social media and we're all in lockdown and we're all putting tons of money into these people's pockets. So if you're going to be scrolling, doom scrolling on your phone 20 hours a day, follow Curve on Instagram. Say hi to me, send me a message, DM me.
All very easy things that we can all do from the comfort of our couches while we're doom scrolling, which is definitely another piece of pandemic lexicon that I will be taking.
That was a rant. I apologize.
No, well said. Eboné, I think you were going to say something.
Merryn nailed it. I always tell people, you know, there are free ways that you can support. Free. You don't even need to pay. And that's, liking our stuff, interacting with us on our social media platforms, even, you know, listening to podcast shows, all the things that we have, it's free to do. And eventually what I tell people and how I explain how that helps, because maybe people who aren't watching don't realize, I think a lot of people do, the way a lot of media companies make revenue is advertising, right? The reason a lot of us are a little bit nervous is because those advertisers are now closed down or whatever. But what helps us, if we can say, hey, we just have this many likes on Twitter, this many likes or engagement on this social media platform, then we can go back to these advertisers once they open and say, hey, this is why you should do business with us. So really it's a trickle down effect. And I always tell people it is free. It costs you nothing to just like, engage, and support your queer media.
Brooke, how about for you? How do you think that this pandemic will change the landscape of queer media?
Well, I think the landscape has already been changing for queer media and for other media entities that focus on you know, specific communities, particularly marginalized communities like ours. I think there had been a sort of contraction of, I think there was a big expansion of media companies, especially digital media companies. I think we've been seeing a contraction probably over the past 5 years at least. So I think we'll probably continue to see that, and maybe the pendulum will swing again. But, you know, I just saw earlier today that Logo had laid off an additional round of people, and this is after their site New Now Next had laid off people. You know, I think that there is, I think there's a lot of value in, you know, until we see an upswing in queer media outlets again, which I hope there will be. I think there's a ton of value in having queer people at mainstream media organizations and making a mark there. You know, a good friend of mine had until recently been a producer on one of NBC's flagship shows and is really passionate about LGBTQ content. And, you know, I said to her, I said, as an out lesbian working for a broadcast NBC show and being a voice in that room, I said, you are doing an amazing service for queer people. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And, you know, before when, you know, when we were talking about NBC being, well, I was talking about it and then Eboné graciously agreed that NBC had been doing a great job with shining a spotlight on how the pandemic is disproportionately impacting people of color and queer people of color. You know, two of the most high-level executives, TV executives at NBC are queer women of color. And I don't think it's an accident that you're seeing NBC doing a great job NBC on covering marginalized issues. NBC has queer people of color at the table where those decisions are getting made. So I think, you know, there's a lot of value in having queer media outlets, but also having our voices in the room at mainstream queer companies.
You're raising just such a good point, which is that LGBTQ media or not mainstream media, I mean, newsrooms have got to do a better job at being diverse and inclusive, and you know, not just hiring folks living at the intersections of different identities, but then also allowing them to dictate the kind of coverage. Because you're so right, like when people tell stories that they know that when they're doing the reporting on their own communities, we know that that is when it is the most authentic. That's when we get the best kinds of stories. So I just think that that's just an incredibly important point just about the media more broadly. Merryn and Eboné, I would also love to hear your thoughts about how do you think, what are the long-term impacts of this pandemic on LGBTQ media?
Well, for me and Curve Media, I think it's a survival game. I think the tragedy, we've gone through so much, we've survived so much, and we're a legacy publication now with 30-year history. My goal would be to survive in whatever form we can. And if that means you know, suspending the print publication, becoming something else, becoming an online presence. We're all in a kind of hibernation right now. The trick is to survive so that when we come out of this, the rebuilding is not going to be so great. That's really the metaphor for everybody right now, if we can just survive this. So in that way, we're not that much different to other people. But we're more vulnerable because, of course, most of us have already taken huge risks to follow our dreams and do what we love, to serve our community. I know my profession as a journalist, I've done it as, it's been my form of activism, you know. So it's really hard when your role as an activist is also how you pay the rent. So I guess our struggle, you know, Eboné, you can say more because you've actually, this is your business as well. So you've taken huge risks, but it's what you need to do.
Exactly. I mean, I guess sounding a little bit cheesy, yeah, we're in survival mode and all we can do is just stay positive and keep the faith. And what I'm hoping is that behind the scenes, we're putting different systems in place because we don't know what's going to happen after this. We have no idea. And you're right. This, for me, was my livelihood to serve my community. And so what I hope happens, yes, this is a hard time for everyone. But what I hope happens is that the community stands by us and realizes how important their stories are and what we're doing in the community. That's what I hope happens in the long term. But I think we're just bracing for whatever might happen. But you asked earlier, how can the community support? This is it, because we're starting to see a lot of LGBTQ things, you know, just fall off the map. Earlier, Brooke was talking about lesbian bars. We've seen LGBTQ media just in the amount of a year or two close down or switch to online and not do print anymore. So I think that we just have to stay hopeful that our community rallies behind us and sees that there is still a need for LGBTQ publications, media, businesses, all of it. Because nobody is going to have that same, tell your story quite the same way as LGBTQ people.
Now we have time for maybe one more question and then I'll switch to the Q&A. So do y'all have any advice for LGBTQ people or business owners or people who are looking to pitch their stories, get their stories told right now? Do you have any advice for them, you know, especially just since, again, talking about that oversaturation of stories with the coronavirus pandemic, trying to break through, the limited amount of space and bandwidth that each of you have to do these stories. What is your advice for people who are looking to get their stories amplified?
I'm happy to jump in here. Look, this is a time when we have to be really creative. And I would say to you, reach out to me. If you're a lesbian bar and you think you're going to go under, if you're a queer person who's created a web series and you don't know how to, you know, you've got no platform to launch it, reach out to me, because your story is potentially my content. And with the minimum amount of effort, I will try and help you. I will try and do what I can. And that could be, you can be a guest in the festival. You can get a byline article up on curvemag.com. I'm sure we can help each other in this.
Yeah, Merryn, again, nailed it for sure. I think it's about being creative. You know, I'm sure everyone gets a lot of like press releases or, hey, can you cover this? A couple, just this week, somebody was like, I'm, you know, a singer. Can you cover me? You got to tell me more than that. So I would say any business, artist, whoever, give us more. Tell us why we should cover you. We want to, but you got to give us more. So just make sure that you're being creative, whether it's in the subject line or what you're doing in the community. We want to tell those stories, but you got to work with us and give us more.
Yeah, I would say to reach out. Anyone can email us at nbcout@nbcuni.com. But also know what the publication covers. I get a lot of emails for things that have absolutely no relation to what we cover. Lots of non-LGBTQ things, you know, things really across the board. So I think people in general who want whether it's their event, themselves, their story covered, know what the publication covers, and then reach out to those that you think are a good fit. Because I think a lot of people probably are, you know, barking up the wrong tree when they're reaching out to outlets. But if it's LGBT related,
I mean, I feel like
send it to me.
These are such good concrete takeaways, right? Like, send details about why you should get that kind of coverage, and then also just know who you're emailing. I feel like I get a lot of pitches sometimes where I'm like, did you look at anything that I've ever covered? I can tell immediately. So that's such a good point. So I just want to switch to our Q&A. We got some questions during the conversation, so thank you to everybody who submitted your questions. I'm going to start with this one, which is, many people are devastated that Pride is canceled. How can queer journalists and media amplify Pride so that we can still celebrate and honor outside of in-person events?
Wow. Well, I know there's a, I think an official announcement will be made soon, but there's a global Pride that will be happening, so people can tune in and watch virtually. But in terms of, was the question about celebrating their local prides?
It was just how to celebrate and honor outside of in-person events.
It's really hard to fully embrace what's happened, because Pride is such an important moment for us all to perform who we are. And with lockdown, we've been deprived of our performativity. And if you're a queer person, and a gender non-conforming person, and a trans person, it's almost like you're not seen if you can't go out and if you can't be in your community. And my biggest concern has been how to offer people visibility during what will be Pride if you're just at home by yourself. But if you look at it this way, the travel industry, the events industry, they're all going through the same problem. If you can think about this idea of bringing the world home to you, you could take this Pride as an opportunity to learn about all the prides and the global prides and connect with people that you would never normally connect with all around the world from the comfort of your home, for no money, for no outlay. So there is a real silver lining here, that you can actually make your world bigger this Pride by not being able to go out.
All right. This question is right on time for us, because today we literally just published basically what top 50 cities in the USA as well as internationally are doing. Some people have canceled, some have postponed, some are moving online. So right now, that's a great resource that we're putting out to people who are like, hey, what's happening in Minneapolis now, or what's happening in, Italy. We have all that information there, because people want to know what do we do. Another thing I would say, as far as relating to Pride, we see a lot of money be put into these Pride celebration events, parties, the festival, all of that. What I would love to see are those businesses starting to help the local communities. We have people scratching at the, local government's door for loans and grants and all of that. This would be a great opportunity for those people to step up and support and online, but also these businesses that are making Pride continue to happen.
You know what else I just wanted to add? I think there are, I don't think any virtual get-together can be an exact substitute for the in-person prides. I think there are a lot of ways to get involved with the community in a virtual manner. I was just to kind of throw out something specific out there, I was on SAGE's website. SAGE is the organization that advocates on behalf of LGBTQ elders, and you can sign up to be matched with an LGBTQ elder, and they'll pair you with someone, and then you have, I think the minimum is a 15-minute conversation a week with a queer elder. I think that's one example of ways that we can, in the spirit of Pride, get involved with the community from our homes. So I'm sure there are a ton of opportunities like that. I think I saw something about, you can read to children, and I think there's a spectrum of things, but I don't know if I don't have a great resource that lists all of these at the top of my head, but I'm sure if you go to some of the big LGBTQ organizations like GLAAD, HRC, Sage, who's the one that I had connected with, they may list out these opportunities.
We've got another question on the topic of Pride. So a little bit more specific. Jared Boyd wrote in the chat. Jared, thank you for your question. Pride is usually a big time where companies are investing money in our community, which Eboné, you kind of mentioned that. However, COVID is impacting that. Where do you think they can still step up next month? Where is the need in our community? Where are y'all seeing specific areas of need?
I mean, I'm seeing, even with a lot of the friends I have in New York, and these are some of my favorite people, people who were in Broadway shows, dancers, musicians that got cancelled, people that have been put on furlough, you know, everybody in our community, healers, bartenders, you know, people that work our bars, you know, they're out of work. I mean, I feel that the theatre community in New York has been great. It's rallied around some of the music industry. There's, you know, different charities like Sweet Relief. I think we need something that is LGBTQ, that can acknowledge that many people in our community earn less money than other people. Many of us are not even considered employable in a mainstream situation, especially trans people. And again, trans people were struggling when things were great, supposedly great. They've never been great for trans people, so they must be struggling even more now. So I think Pride might need to pivot quite quickly. And yes, I wanted to go and see Janelle Monáe. I wanted to see an A-lister at Pride Island. Who doesn't? But it's different now. So it would be interesting to see what they do with the resources they had for that spectacle. Can they do something for us now?
Yeah, I'd like to see these organizations or companies step up in areas that most need it. You mentioned, you know, LGBT seniors, LGBTQ youth. There's a huge disproportionate number of LGBTQ people of color that live in poverty or homelessness. I'd love to see our trans organizations get reached out to a lot more. Also, you know, we're talking LGBTQ, but obviously there's a lot of intersectionality here. And we mentioned at the beginning about Black Americans and the ridiculous amount or percentage that are contracting coronavirus and passing away from it. I'd love to see companies really step up, because it's one thing for us to tell the stories, like people want to know why, you know, and people are starting to learn why. We know that a lot of Black Americans are, you know, essential workers. We also know that Black Americans are, you know, the healthcare system is infamous, notorious for turning away Black and brown bodies and not taking us seriously, especially women of color, right? So you add up all these things and we're talking about it. All of us are doing our due diligence, right? To make sure we get that information out, and it's important we get it out to our specific community. But what's next? I always challenge myself, what's next? How can we be a part of the solution and not part of the problem? I would love to see those companies do exactly that and say, wow, I see there's a need in this LGBTQ Black community. I see there's a need in the transgender community and LGBTQ youth. That, I feel like that would be the best money spent for those companies and within our own community.
I think for people, speaking about getting big companies to step up, I think one important strategy for people that work at big companies to get involved in their employee resource group, because oftentimes it's a push from the inside that ends up moving companies in to help certain organizations and advocate for certain things. I know at NBC, I used to run my first round at NBC. I used to run our LGBT employee resource group, and the resource groups can wield a lot of influence in terms of getting big corporations on board to advocate for certain things in certain communities. So I would say anyone who's working at a big company right now to start, getting involved with their ERGs and making waves from within.
We have time for one more question. This is from Leon from Sharp Suiting. Leon, thank you so much for being here and for your question, who says, more economic reporting specifically regarding economic pieces. How are small LGBTQ businesses pivoting to sustain the economic crisis? What are the additional services provided from NGLCC and SBA specific to the community? What businesses are shutting down versus thriving and why? Where can we get more accurate information about the loans and economic support available to us?
There's a lot packed in there.
Yes. So I guess, yeah, so take whichever piece of that you would like.
I'm happy to take this one first, because there's actually, I've been for most of today editing a story about lesbian bars and the remaining lesbian bars across the US, which interesting thing that I had no idea. There was, at the height of lesbian bars, I think this was in the late 80s, there were 200, which I was surprised at, because ever since I've been going, I've only known about a handful. But now there are only, I think, 15. And we're going to create a cool infographic map, which we'll include in our story. So stay tuned for that. But many of these, if not all of them, have had to close due to the pandemic. And our reporter, Julie Compton, who's working on this incredible piece that I hope to publish on Friday, found that a number of them are scared that they will not be reopening once the pandemic is over, because it's taking such a financial hit. And a lot of these business owners, or several of them at least, spoke with her about how they have been unable so far to get a small business loan as part of the pandemic relief effort. So many of them have reached out to the community in terms of online fundraising to try to help them weather the storm. So, you know, anyone who is in a financial position amid this crisis can, can donate and help them stay afloat, so we don't have less than 15 lesbian bars left in the US after all this.
Boy, this is a tough one. Look, I would say you have to look at this as a very, very bad downturn. And if you are in business, this is going to hurt, but I think if you can be agile, if you can look around you to people who are good business allies, if it means you form a partnership or some kind of synergy with somebody else who's in the same boat as you, and you rethink your position, because this pandemic is going to change, you know, all of the markets, and it's why obviously the Trump administration is so desperate to reboot the economy, because this is the unthinkable for them. But it might just be that you need to change what it is you're offering people right now, and adapt to the circumstances, because if this is the new normal, there might not be a going back to the way it was before. That would be my advice right now. What can you change about what you're doing to suit these circumstances?
Yeah, as far as there were a few questions in there about like, how do you get the money, or where do you go to get it, and all of that. I think I can speak for some of us when we say we don't even know, right? But what I do know is I hope that this brings out a different line of thinking and how we do things. I've been joking and saying, hey, businesses, we plan for, plan A, plan B, plan C, but what we didn't plan for is plan Z. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So what I'm hoping that does come out of this, the next time, I don't even want to say next time, if something like this happens again to this magnitude, how do we better serve small businesses? How do we make it more accessible for thousands and millions of people that are getting on a website? How do we do that? That's my hope for things that, maybe there will be different type of grants for LGBTQ communities. How do we make sure that small businesses are really getting the money and not Ruth Chris, you know what I mean? Things like that. So that's what I'm hoping happens. I can't answer it now, but I hope people learn from this and plan for Plan Z.
Very well said. We have one more super quick question that I want to get to before we close things up. This is from an anonymous attendee who said, as a freelance writer who was writing for New Now Next and other LGBTQ plus publications, now no longer taking freelance pitches, I'm worried. Do your publications pay freelance writers and currently accept pitches? And what other media would you recommend still pitching? Just really quick to keep us out, are you taking pitches? Any advice for folks who are, now looking to pitch some stories and doing freelance?
Well, I mean, reach out for sure. Send writing samples. I know for Tagg Magazine, we always ask for a few writing samples. We'll chit chat with you, and we do pay our writers as well.
I mean, yeah, you can. We've ceased publishing in the form that we did before, but reach out anyway, because there's usually something we can do. And I can always refer you if I think you've got a pitch that somebody else might like. I would certainly refer you on to a colleague if I could. So, yeah.
We are accepting freelance pitches. If anyone's interested, they can send a pitch to nbcout@nbcuni.com. And we typically look for folks who have written for national publications before and ask for writing samples. During this time, a lot of the folks that we have been working with, other publications they've been working with are no longer able to commission freelance pieces. So, I'm trying to prioritize the folks that have been writing for us for a while, but certainly a unique pitch, I'm always happy to receive. And yes, we do pay for freelance contributions.
Well, listen, we have to end it there. It was so wonderful getting to talk to the three of you. I know these are such difficult times, but I feel better knowing that we have your editorial leadership at your various publications. So thanks y'all so much for talking to me. Thanks to our audience as well. And normally this is what I would say, can we please give a huge round of applause for our panelists? But this will have to do instead. So I'm just gonna kick things back to Anita, who I think has some closing remarks.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to thank Alex, Merryn, Eboné, and Brooke again for joining us today. It means so much to me on a personal level, and also to the dapperQ team, that you were willing to share your time and your thoughts with us. I think that you all exemplify what queer folks can do together, especially queer media. You all have been supportive of dapperQ's efforts in various ways, whether it's mentoring me on how to be a better speaker, I'm still getting there, or covering the fashion shows, or allowing me to write for your platforms and grow. And I think, we can really get through this together. I know you mentioned that some of you are working on pieces, and dapperQ is happy to amplify those special pieces if you want to send them to us through our social media. And before people sign off, I'm just going to share a slide that has where to find all of our speakers and our moderator. So jot that down. They are their personal social media, but you can follow them and then find out all the different publications that they own or work for, and then follow them there too. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye.